dinner. Does she make dinner, have one plate, sit down, eat it, the husband stares at her? Unlikely. She makes one part of the dinner for herself and another plate for him. Does she only make her side of the bed? Unlikely. Probably makes the whole bed. Does she only throw her laundry into the washer? Nah, she probably throws all of it. You get the picture? She produces a surplus. Who gets the surplus? Again, long story. I just want to tease you with where this analysis goes. The husband does. He gets the surplus. That's his social role, just like it's hers to produce it. They are tied together, not like a capitalist and a worker. He doesn't pay her a salary. That would be a different relationship. They're held together by oaths of loyalty, commitment, love, cherish, all kinds of words we have, special words for the bond between them. They swear to that, typically in front of a legal authority or a religious authority. And the wife understands somehow in this culture that her job is to cook and clean and do the housework. I talk about traditional marriage, all women here have said it, but you know what I mean. That's her notion, that's how she expresses her love for him. And his job is to go out and have a good job and come home and receive appreciatively the surplus delivered to him inside the household. That's the way we've organized. And this kind of a class structure, because that's what it is. Why? Because that's what Marx means by class structure. A particular organization of the surplus. And that's what we've just done. So we have to ask, with Marx, the question, well, which of the 5 kinds is it? Is it capitalist? Now we can see that because he's not buying her labor power. It's not the relationship. There's no wages. There's no labor market. There's no commodity produced and sold. None of that. It's not capitalist. It's not slave because the husband doesn't own the wife, or she is. It's not an ancient, self-employed person because there's 2. And it isn't communist because they don't together do all the work and together decide what to do with the surplus. She produces the surplus, he gets it. Well, if it isn't slave, it isn't capitalist, it isn't ancient, it isn't communist, there's only one left. Feudal. Feudal. But where does the word feudal come from? Medieval Europe. What was the class structure there? Hey, here goes. Here's how it worked. In feudalism in Europe, the way a serf, the surplus producer, and a lord of the land, the surplus receiver, the way they arranged this system was by a ceremony that was partly civil and partly religious. And the way it worked is the serf got down on one knee, and the lord put the flat of a sword on his shoulder, and they proceeded to engage in front of a priest, a Roman Catholic priest, in a swearing to, ready, love, honor, and obey one another. Does that sound anyway familiar? The origin of the marriage ceremony is medieval feudalism. No accident there. And the serf was to love the Lord and to be there for him. And the Lord was to love the serf and care for him. And part of the love and caring, that the serf worked 3 days on his own land and kept the produce, and 3 days on the land of the Lord, as I told you, and the Lord kept the produce. Part of the love and honor and the personal bond was, without them knowing it, the production of a surplus by one for the other. But here comes the punchline. If a relationship of love, affection, and intimacy has woven into it exploitation by one partner or the other, how long do you think that relationship is going to last? At least in any kind of good form. Maybe not too long. Maybe if the family, the traditional family, is actually a feudal, exploitative class structure, we have to rethink American history. Because American history now has to be rethought using Marxian theory as not just the enterprises, the capitalists, the struggle with the work. That's part of the story, but here's another part. The people in that capitalist enterprise, worker on the one hand, capitalist on the other, came from, and at the end of every day, went back into another class structure. Ooh, it's getting complicated. They went home at 5 o'clock. And when they went home, they entered into another class structure. But with this big difference. If the woman went out to work, as nowadays is the norm, she was probably a surplus producer on the job. And when she came home, she was one again. She got it twice. But the husband has a completely different situation. Yes, he's exploited at the job, but when he comes home, he can think of himself, to coin a phrase that Americans love, as, notice the interesting allusion, king of the castle. Another medieval reference. I'm king in the castle, because he is. He offsets his exploitation on the job by a compensating exploiter role at home. One which might become all the more important to him as the conditions of his exploitation on the job deteriorate. Maybe even if wages go down at the job, the husband demands more surplus as a compensation from the only place he can get compensation, the wife. Maybe wages went down in the 1970s in America. They did. And for the first time, American men, working men, discovered that they were no longer going to get the rising wages they had gotten in the 100 years before. And maybe American men went a little nutty. They couldn't afford to provide the American dream to their wife, to their children, because the wages weren't going up anymore. And maybe suddenly they became very agitated, difficult to live with, squeezing the women to do more at home. Not just more physical work, but more emotional work, maybe more sexual work, compensate, offset, mollify the situation that was deteriorating on the job. And maybe that took women who were increasingly going out of the house to be exploited 8 hours a day out there, maybe to come home and to have to take care of the housework, which women still do the overwhelming bulk of, whether they work or not. Maybe it was just one bit too many. Maybe the household class structure simply could no longer tolerate what happened when the men's wages went down, when the families compensated by sending more women out to work because the men's wages weren't going up anymore. And so the women had to be exploited outside as well as inside, and the women at a certain point said, that's it, I can't stand this anymore. The divorce rate in the United States was very flat for a long time and took off in the 1970s and has never come down. We have the highest divorce rate of any capitalist country in the world, and we have had now for 25 years. Not only that, this feudal transitional family is disappearing. Nobody wants it anymore. Young people don't organize their lives that way. The fastest growing kind of family in the United States is not this kind of family. It's a different class structure. Two new class structures of households have exploded in the last 20 years. The most important, the ancient class structure. The man, but even more, the woman who lives alone. I've had it with this. I'm going to be my own boss in my household, with or without children. The fastest growing kind of family in the United States. And the second kind of family is also breaking away from the feudal class structure. It's people who get together and organize. Now, they don't use this language. Of course, no one uses this language because, fortunately, Americans are not polluted by Marxist surplus theory. So they don't have these stories. But they're struggling to set up different kinds of families. Either an individual, living by myself. Most American women today live outside of a relationship with another person. They're alone. Single women. The second biggest one, besides of people living alone, people living in groups, 2, 3, 4. And they are setting up, not with this word, but they're setting up what Marx would call communist class structure. They're organizing the household, that the work is done collectively, it's shared. We all do the work together, then we decide what to do with whatever surplus we produce in the way of meals and cleaning and so on. And we organize it. Ooh. If you follow the logic here, here's an arresting thought. While Marxists and socialists and leftists have kept their eye on the enterprise, where no class revolution is going on, this Marxist theory actually tells us there has been and continues to be a revolution going on. Only it's not a revolution in the enterprise. It's a revolution in the class structure of households. And it is changing people and upsetting lives and transforming them in a way that nothing on the job has done. This is a society that for 25 years has been obsessed by psychology and psychiatry, by personal improvement, by interpersonal relationships, by the tension between homosexuality, heterosexuality, obsessed with spouse abuse, child abuse, you name it. The right wing cashed in on it by calling it the time of the great crisis of family values. They at least understood that something powerful was going on to tap into. The left didn't. Too bad for the left. They didn't make any way. They didn't gain anything from this. They lost. But they didn't need to. The surplus theory might have identified that there was something going on inside American households. There was, in fact, a revolution by women to break out of a class structure in all the different conscious, unconscious ways. Imagine a left that had been able, seriously, as in the early days of women's liberation, there were some, to tap into that, to have something to say to women caught up in a double exploitation on the job and at home. A way to handle that, a way to bring women together, which again, in the early days of women's liberation, with consciousness-raising groups, there was some of that.
There's a group called Red Stocking.
Red Stocking started, there were several. The group of women that did Our Bodies, Ourselves, that early book, there were leftist women who are often in the early phases of the women's liberation movement, but they were unable to find a way, theoretically or practically, to hold on, so it got shunted off into glass ceiling structures, equal pay for equal work, which is a feminist movement, but not one informed by any of this apparatus. Let me conclude then by using this apparatus to do a little American history with you. And I've done bits and pieces, so it's a nice way to pull it all together. American capitalism was a remarkable institution. Notice I use the past tense, that's wishful thinking. American capitalism was remarkable. It was a new class structure, capitalism, in the 18th century, relatively speaking, but it left Europe, and that gave it a very peculiar set of conditions, unlike capitalism anywhere else, particularly unlike the capitalism that maybe was in Europe, except for this as an outpost. How was it peculiar? Well, unlike European capitalism, there was no feudalism that it had to deal with. Everywhere in Europe, capitalism emerges out of feudalism. And that